So much has really been made over essentially the efforts of both the NHS, doctors and nurses, and care home staff, and rightly so. They have done fantastic being on the front lines fighting COVID non-stop. However, there has been a group that has been completely ignored from, again, their efforts in helping to fight the... Well, they didn't have a direct role in helping to fight the virus, but their contribution to society is very often overlooked. And of course, we are talking about teachers. And teachers have really been on the front lines. And they have suffered a lot. I've got a cousin who's a teacher, so I know I've heard a lot of stuff from what's been going on in his school. I know a couple of other friends who have friends who are teachers, and overwhelmingly, they've all know at least teachers and staff in the school who have caught coronavirus not just once, but twice. And that should be incredibly concerning, especially with, at the moment, the unknown effects of long COVID. So these people were put on the front lines. Even though they didn't have a direct role in fighting the virus, they did play a direct role in, again, helping to educate our youth. And the fact that we do not acknowledge that enough, and I'm pretty sure when the final ledger and all this is being counted, I can guarantee you, unfortunately, there will be a lot of teachers' names who are on the list of the dead of the coronavirus. And unfortunately, that will be on the head of Gavin Williamson, because he has been pretty much in charge of all this mess of education that's been happening since really 2012. So let's get into this other complete and utter mess that has really been education and the coronavirus, and how schools have, well, helped to spread the virus, and the government still does not seem to understand this. So before we do jump into that, please do hit that like, share and subscribe button, and of course down below there is a link to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, well, buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you to everyone who does support the channel that way. So on with the story. So this comes from Yorkshire Bylines, and the title is Schools and COVID, playing catch the virus and then pass it on. So, when the Johnson variant of the Prime Ministerial responsibility announced the delay to Freedom Day, few believed the spin that this was the one last heave. The government says it's testing for relaxing lockdown, depending on the vaccine rollout to under 40s and vaccinated people not requiring hospitalisation if they contract COVID, rising infections and keeping low enough not to overwhelm the NHS, and no new variants of concern appearing. But with our borders open and Heathrow processed over 675,000 passengers in May alone, and infections rising in schools, it seems to have a cavalier to pin all hope on the vaccinations, particularly as allowing COVID to continue to circulate in the community at these levels provide the perfect conditions for further mutations and variants to develop. So, as any parent knows, kids spread coughs and colds and COVID, but that evidence escapes the Prime Minister completely. And acting fast to try and contain the Delta variant was far too much to expect from a government too concerned to watch kids starve until a footballer put the boot in. Schools were complete vectors for infections, and to pretend otherwise is completely disingenuous. How many more times do we have to hear the flexible excuse that we do not have enough evidence on infections in schools and among children? Patrick Vallance even hinted as much when he said on the 14th of June that school holidays will help to suppress the spread. So why hasn't there been any immediate rethink on transmissions in schools, on how and when they will open, on mandatory masking and of course distancing and staggered school days, smaller classes and more time off for staff and pupils alike, And this isn't the time to look for what kind of clean air filtration systems our schools may need to head off the autumn COVID. All of that should have been prioritised last year, like it has been in Europe. Finland, Denmark and Germany have been among the lowest death rates of COVID in Europe. In Germany, publicity over how infectious diseases spread, like Langolier and COVID spread throughout poor aircon in planes and elsewhere, has led parents to ask when air scrubbing filtration in schools would be upgraded. They felt that more should be spent immediately on upgrading the aircon systems to purify the air and scrub away virus, so that kids who rapidly accepted masking up and social distancing would no longer have to wear outdoor coats, sitting by open windows for up to full 45 minutes in cold weather before having to have a quick fresh air break. Why so many people in Europe are getting to relaxed lockdown and still wearing masks, Global Britain's leader lobs quite a few quid to schools catching up classes, and then tries to divert us from the lack of hygiene and containment measures, such as promptly curbing transmissions using flight bans to add to hotspots to like India. This looks like a lot of covering up for continuing to pursue herd immunity while tinkering with a bit of COVID confinement. Mask wearing, social distancing, hygiene and effective ventilation are vital to preventing the spread. None were mentioned at all by the PM. Instead, in his press conference, he insisted that the vaccine would stop thousands from dying. Chris Whitty also stressed the importance of getting vaccinated. He said that delaying Freedom Day for a month would give the NHS more time to vaccinate more people under the 40s. The government hopes that this will mean the current exponential growth rate in transmission will be halted. But if there is a glaring gap, however, schools and the approach implicitly assumes that transmissions is the greatest in the over 18s. Bringing the school holidays forward or an extra half-term holiday would help to actually limit the opportunities for kids to contract and spread COVID. Retaining masks and juggling the school day would also help. Closures would affect opening up the economy in the short term, but in the long term, this would all pay dividends in helping to avert the further spread of the stop-start measures. It would also mean furlough would mean revisiting and it's restarting immediately as well. The short-termism doesn't work, as the UK has now shown. So if your school has any outdoor space, wouldn't it be better for your children to be playing non-contact sports rather than sitting in stuffy classrooms playing catch the virus and pass it on? Before the end of last month, unions and school leaders wrote to the schools minister Gavin Williamson urging action as COVID infections forced the closure of an increasing number of schools before the bank holiday half-term break. The Guardian even reported that the data published by the Office of National Statistics showed a significant increase in the percentage of school staff testing positive for COVID antibodies. This was interpreted as meaning that they were probably asymptomatic of being exposed to COVID in schools between December and March, when schools were fully reopened without adequate test and trace and containment, unlike in Germany. Not until the 8th of March 2021 did the government actually recommend making rapid testing available on a regular basis to secondary schools when schools were reopened. The UK has been rather late to introduce free masks and free tests for the public as well for schools. By contrast, in March of last year, Germany was already testing secondary schools twice a week and extended them quickly to primary classes and everyone, including young children. They also had to mask up. The German policy of isolating in a class was not just one person tested positive. This has helped to contain the transmission. Elsewhere in the EU a year ago, Denmark also demonstrated how rapidly responding to COVID and swift lockdown and then to reopen schools safely, whereas Britain reopened its doors to some 70,000 people for the Cheltenham races in March of last year. Denmark closed its borders and then shut its schools on the 11th of March. Then, when the schools opened, they split classes, provided hand sanitizers and insisted on everyone wearing masks, and provided lessons outdoors where possible. Letting highly transmissional COVID variant run wild among, literally running amok, is a completely bad look, and it's bad for our collective health and economy. While EU companies are beginning to open up their borders to each other, they fear the super spreaders, the Brits, who will undo their own carefully relaxed timing of their own restrictions and successful vaccine rollout, and the end of the lockdowns. Our European neighbours don't even want us to visit our friends and relatives there, whom they haven't seen for close to nearly 2 years. The UK's enviable status as an island state has swiftly vaccinating its people and rapidly sequencing COVID genomes seems to have been completely squandered. Lives, trust and willingness to learn from basic good hygiene practice have completely evaporated. Politicians who choose not to equip themselves with and act on medical expertise in the pandemic have much to answer for. And that is completely true. I mean, I'm sure we'll end up getting some teachers in the comments below telling them about the experience of what it's been like for the past since 2020. But I guarantee you the story will be the same, of lots of teachers catching COVID and then going down with it, and some even catching it twice. Like I say, this will not be good because we still do not know the effects of long COVID. And as we said before, children luckily do seem to be immune to the effects of much of the COVID. However, this does not stop them from being spreaders. And more worryingly, if as schools, as has been said here, are such vectors for transmission, it's very possible that we could get a new variant of the coronavirus from these schools that could be a lot more, unfortunately, more effective on younger people and cause them more damage. And again, if a mutation does happen that is immune to our vaccination process and sends us back to square one, there is no one to blame in that scenario but our government. So, as always, thank you for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee. Wait, well, Buy Me Coffee. And as always, thank you all for watching, and thank you all for the support that you show the channel as well. And of course, we'll see you all next time.